What's up, everybody? Welcome on into DraftKings, the slate. Gary and Thor and I am Adam Kaufman, and this is the Thursday sports edition, which means we will be heavy football. Of course, 'tis the season, and we'll get into a little basketball, maybe some baseball on the back end, because Gary, and as you well know from following along on my Twitter, my world has been rocked a little bit over the last, 20, 18 hours, whatever it's been. But we'll get there. We'll get there a little bit later. Let's start with football. And I wish we had a game to be excited about. I'm excited, Gary, because it's football. It's a Thursday night, and that just in and of itself, that's fun. But man, this matchup, the Raiders and the Rams, uncertainty on the LA side in terms of who the quarterback is going to be. For the Raiders, an underachieving team, albeit with some star power. Just on paper, a terrible game that we have in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, I won't ever feel bad for Jeff Bezos or like Amazon as a company. They just have too much money to ever have my sympathy. But you at least understand why, like 4 months ago, they were probably like, this can't miss. I mean, everyone's talking about how the AFC West is the greatest division of all time. The Raiders got Davante Adams. We've got the reigning Super Bowl champs. Like, this game's going to be awesome. And it's not. It's terrible. I think there was a graphic during last week's Thursday Nighter towards the end of the game where they were trying to promote this week's game, and they had like that side-by-side graphic that's supposed to feature two of the star players, like one on each side. And I'm not saying this guy's not a star. He's like a very household name. But it was Davante Adams on one side and Jalen Ramsey on the other. And they were really trying to play up like the one-on-one matchup or whatever, but it's like, he's the only guy left. There's no one else on Los Angeles that anyone knows. I mean, I guess like Cam Akers is sort of their next most known
a guy
name.
Who was benched a good chunk of the year.
Or you know what? Baker Mayfield is now
May
probably
as well be Baker,
like,
right? I mean, to your point, like Cooper Kupp is. I'm thinking about, just for giggles, I'm thinking about rostering Cooper Kupp tonight. Not because he'll play; he's on IR. He's not going to play. But I just like the idea of having a $200 Cooper Kupp in my lineup. Well, what the heck, right? Just for optics. But there's no Cooper Kupp. There's no Aaron Donald. He is out tonight, and there's no Matt Stafford, as mentioned. We'll talk more about the quarterback situation, which of course involves Baker Mayfield. But yeah, maybe it really is just Jalen Ramsey or Bobby Wagner.
Yeah. And look, Jalen Ramsey, again, cornerback stats, they're a lot like catcher stats. There's a lot of like weird fuzziness in here that you really have to account for. No one in the NFL has given up more touchdowns this season than Jalen Ramsey. And again, still a great corner, but just like even their one last star player, their one last like 5-star guy has not actually been playing that well so far in 2022. So goodness, the Rams are in a dark place right now. When you're looking at a matchup that features the Rams and the Raiders are clearly the team that's in a better place, that's really saying something about the state of the Rams right now.
That actually reminds me, it was last year, right? The Trayvon Diggs had all the interceptions. He had like 35 interceptions, and but what nobody was talking about was that he was allowing the most yards to opposing receivers of anybody in the league, by a wide margin. It wasn't even close. So it's
just going for picks.
He's getting a pick every week basically, and yay, let's celebrate him. But yeah, it was just getting torched. So kind of like Ramsey with the touchdowns. But you know what? That's a good way to kind of dovetail into the captain conversation in this game, because it would seemingly be, in terms of the projections, this is true. You wrote about it on DK Nation. It's certainly, your opinion's the popular opinion, which is, who do you captain in this game? It's kind of a 2-horse race. It's Davante Adams or it's Josh Jacobs. You could make a pretty good case either way. Most people might be inclined to go with Davante Adams, despite, that matchup. I was looking at some of the numbers in an article I was reading earlier, and Adams going against Jalen Ramsey. They've faced off, if you will, in the last 2 regular season meetings. Adams has torched him. 13 catches, 16 targets, 237 yards. No touchdowns, but big catches, big yards. And obviously an elite player. Over his last 5 games, he's averaging 133 receiving yards, has 7 touchdowns. So is this the no-brainer? Are you inclined to go Jacobs? What's the direction here?
I lean Adams. And again, I don't hold it against anyone if they lean Jacobs. He's slightly cheaper, which is important when you're like dealing with this much money. He's had 2 fantastic back-to-back weeks. I'd say he has the higher floor just because I think Jacobs is locked into like 20 to 25 touches, where Adams has to do more with his opportunities. But at the same time, one, Davante Adams has been nearly unstoppable going back to week 9. In that span of time, he leads the NFL in targets, receptions, receiving yards, receiving touchdowns, and DraftKings points. He's averaging basically half a DraftKings point per snap played. So even the snaps where they're running the football and he's on the field, still about half a DraftKings point with how efficient he's been able to be. 4 games with at least 30 DraftKings points in his last 5. And you start looking at this matchup. Again, Ramsey has gotten beat many times this season. A lot of the times he's getting beat in the red zone, near the end zone, and he's giving up those touchdowns. So that has something to do with this. But when we talk about teams that are bad against the pass, it's hard to necessarily find, all right, what is that very wide concept mean for particular players? And the Rams have been particularly bad against wide receiver ones. And if you just look at some of the box scores we've seen from legit number 1 wide receivers going up against this Rams defense, not even just recently, but throughout the season. So games where they were really healthy, games where they had Aaron Donald supplying interior pressure and helping out the rest of his defense, they've given up at least 19 DraftKings points to Stephon Diggs, Drake London, Marquise Brown, who was the Cardinals' number 1 wide receiver when there was no DeAndre Hopkins. They also gave up more than 19 DraftKings points to DeAndre Hopkins when there was no Marquise Brown. So they've been doing it to everybody. Chris Olave's gone for a big game. Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk have each had massive performances in the 2 games that the 49ers have played against the Rams so far this season. And literally last week, without Aaron Donald, we had both Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf finish that game with over 125 receiving yards and a touchdown, basically each locking into 30 DraftKings points in their own right. So while I do think Jacobs is in a great spot, I just think assets of Davante Adams' ilk have been destroying this matchup all season, and Adams is arguably the best at what he does in football. So there's no reason for me to think that he's not going to have a massive performance tonight.
So to your point, the Rams have allowed the 3rd most receiving yards to opposing wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. However, they've been stout against the run, okay? 284 yards allowed to running backs. Jacobs, as we know, has been all sorts of elite. Like, despite entering the season in a perceived committee timeshare situation, he's just been Josh Jacobs.
He played in the Hall of Fame game, Koff. How could he be any good?
I know. He's been outstanding over the course of this season. Multiple 30-point DraftKings performances. He had the one with the overtime touchdown a couple weeks back where he went to 50-plus fantasy points. He was absurd. 100-plus yards his last 3 games, and that's on the ground. In fact, well over that. 482 rushing, 3 touchdowns, 11 for 131 receiving. So that's north of 600 total scrimmage yards for Josh Jacobs just over his last 3 games. And he is the popular captain choice in this game, projected about 24% ownership as compared to 18% to Davante Adams. As you said, marginally cheaper. That does matter when there's, a fair amount of guys, at least on the Raiders side, that you want to pay up for in this game. But given what I just said, the fact that the Raiders have been so much worse against receivers versus running backs, why does the projection lean toward Jacobs, you think?
Again, I think it's like price. It's very rare to pay over $19,000 to captain a player, regardless of how good that player is. I mean, Adams' price tag is incredulous on this slate. And again, just the sort of like locked in volume that a running back gives you. I think there are scenarios and there are scripts with how this game plays out where Davante Adams didn't get that involved or as involved as you would want him to get in the first half of this game. And then the Raiders were just winning by enough and weren't worried about the offensive output of the Rams, where they just spent the second half largely running the football. I mean, that's a very realistic path for this game. I think Jacobs is pretty much, like I said, locked into 25 touches. You could maybe even argue he's locked into 30 touches with how he's playing right now. So that's really appealing, and I can't knock people for doing that. What I will say how this slate kind of sets up and just these two teams and sort of where they are, I think this is actually one of those slates where you can use both of these guys in the same lineup. And I know that seems obvious, but if you're captaining one of them and then using another in a flex spot, that really limits your funds for the final 4 spots in your lineup. So some people might not be inclined to do that. They might think it's a one or the other sort of thing. They might want access to Derek Carr if they're going to be captaining Devontae Adams. What I would say about Carr is while he's had some pretty good performances lately, he's so locked in. He's so pigeonholed on just getting the ball to Devontae Adams. It almost feels like you don't need both of them because Adams is like 50% of the Raiders passing offense anyway. So you're basically getting the best element of that passing offense without having to use the quarterback. This isn't like a Tom Brady situation where he's spreading the ball out. There's 4 or 5 different receivers who might get the touchdown. No. If Derek Carr does anything tonight, it's going to be because either Josh Jacobs or Devontae Adams caught the ball in the end zone. So at this point, I think you can maybe fade Carr if you really just want to use both these guys. And the way the Rams sort of like back end of their receiving core is kind of shaping up right now, you can save the money elsewhere, specifically with just taking a chance on a sub $1,000 Rams wide receiver and hoping he catches a pass.
So what I'll say to all that, Garion, is if you it makes all the sense in the world, obviously, that the two captain choices, Adams and Jacobs, are the guys that we're talking about. And there'll be some people in tournaments, going after the million differentiation sake, they're going to captain somebody else. Not only would I personally, like if I'm making one lineup, not only would I not fade Derek Carr, I would consider, I could be talked into captaining Carr, saving money, obviously having both Adams and Jacobs in my lineup, and then allowing me to pay up to get, I don't know, I haven't done it out, but to get a Van Jefferson in there, who's the number one with no Cooper Kupp, no Allen Robinson, or a Skoranek, or one of the tight ends. We can debate Higbee versus Moreau in a little bit if you want to, but even, and I'm not saying do this, but just salary wise, like we were joking about it in our Slack even before coming on, but it's true. Just mathematically, you could captain one of those two guys, probably Jacobs just being a hair cheaper than Adams. You could fit Adams, you could fit Carr, you could put both the kickers in there, Gary, and like you could do it. If you believe this is going to be an ugly game, lower scoring, you're going to get some points because teams are going to stall out in the red zone, that type of thing. It's an approach you could take. But going back to Carr, I guess what I wonder is, again, this Rams defense is not what it once was, not by a long shot. They are averaging or allowing an average of 296 passing yards over the last 4 weeks. So you're basically right at the 300 bonus. And Derek Carr has had 5 straight games with multiple touchdown passes as well. Again, he's been largely glued to Devontae Adams, like you talked about. Mac Hollins is getting involved and Foster Moreau is getting involved and, that type of thing. But I don't know. I think you could make an argument for Carr not having a better game than Adams or Jacobs, because that's just not how the fantasy scoring works, but having a game that is truly impactful to where, I don't know, if I'm already fading the quarterback on the other side, I'm really hesitant to fade Derek Carr.
That's fair. I just think with how outrageously these two skill position players are priced, it really is going to have to make you think creatively about some of these things, because it's just a lot of money. I mean, let's put it in now. If you put Devontae Adams in the captain spot and then surrounded him with Josh Jacobs and Derek Carr, I'm going to say you've got about like 3,500. You said
left. Adams in the captain spot?
Yeah, let's have Adams in the captain spot.
Jacobs and then Carr.
So
and
2,700. Now, there are ways to sort of like circumvent that. And again, I would say focusing on sort of the latter half of the Rams receiving core is probably the way you do that. But those are some high variance options. I just think, like you said, Carr's had a couple games. He's had multiple games with multiple touchdowns recently, but all of the touchdowns go to Devontae Adams. So
right.
Again, you're playing a risky game here any way you slice it. I just think that this is one of those rare situations where, yes, it's double points, and that's nice. But if Carr finishes with like 19, 21 DraftKings points, I don't think he's going to be in the optimal lineup if all of those points and all those touchdowns are still going to Devontae Adams, just because that's not enough of his own impact there versus Adams. But It's tough. Hey,
Yeah, great.
we've got some guests here.
All right, walk away. Go live your best life. See you later. All right, let's parenting himself at this point in time. So, all right, picking up on what you were saying to the degree of the amount that I even caught while you were talking, I think that obviously you have to go cheap, so you have to get into some of the punt plays and some of the interesting options that are, and we're not going to build out a lineup here, but some of the, cheaper plays, obviously, like Keelan Cole is a guy who's getting a lot of attention tonight as, a $200 play, in part because obviously the snap percentage, snap share that he has, he's getting a lot of opportunity out there, not turning it into a lot of results, looking at his game log right here, he's not doing a whole lot, only a couple of targets on average over the last handful of games and was shut out last week. But is that a direction? If you're looking at punt plays, if you're looking at guys that are, I don't know, let's call it sub 2K. So we'll include Zamir White in the conversation. Sure. Is Keelan Cole at the top of your list, or where are you going?
It's probably McCutchen if he plays. And that's the thing is there's so much uncertainty already at the bottom of this Rams receiving core because there's just so many injuries with Kupp and with Robinson. McCutchen played a great deal of snaps last week. As you saw, he had, not last week, he was injured last week, but the week prior, had 4 targets in that game. I think the best Rams receiver, like in a vacuum, is probably Van Jefferson. And then I would say the next best is maybe Tutu Atwell, just because he has that big play potential. But you still have to pay almost $5,000 for Atwell. You still have to pay $5,000 for Ben Skoranek, who, plays almost every snap and runs a route on every single drop back. Like there's value in that too. But, at $200, if McCutchen or Cole catch one pass, they're already looking at 10x value.
Right.
So those are the kind of like really, really risky punt plays you have to make on a slate that's as top heavy as this slate is. Though I will say, we've kind of been referencing it a little bit. I do think there's nice value options, mid-tier value options in the middle of this slate. But at the end of the day, this really does feel like a stars and scrubs kind of showdown slate.
I'm looking at some of the projections. Cole right around 5.5 points. McCutchen right around 3.5 to 4. If in fact, obviously, he plays like you said. Bryson Hopkins, the tight end, backup tight end there for LA. Malcolm Brown, running back, obviously, and who? I guess that brings us to another good conversation. What is the direction of this backfield going to be for LA? Because you brought up Cam Akers before, and I know he's coming off a very good week, but this is a guy people in season-long leagues were dropping him halfway through the season because he was buried. He wanted to be traded. He wasn't, even in the rotation. He wasn't in the mix. He wasn't active. And now all of a sudden, after it was Kieran Williams a couple weeks ago, Cam Akers is suddenly the guy again last week. So it would seem like it's trending Akers again. But how do you navigate this?
It was pretty strongly Akers last week, and it's only 1 week, so I can maybe understand some hesitation. In my article on Playbook, I mentioned him even as a captain's option just because of where his price point is. If I want to let people behind the curtain a little bit, I also just didn't want to write up 2 Raiders, the 2 most expensive players on the slate, as my 2 favorite captain options. I wanted to give a little bit of a different perspective. But I stand by what I wrote, which was basically that if you look at how Akers was involved last week, he had 18 touches. He was the red zone back. He played 72% of the offensive snaps. Generally speaking, those are now our parameters for what a bell cow running back is. I think if you look through, the amount of running backs this season, the league leaders in running back snap share, there's only 4 or 5 guys over 70%. It doesn't seem like it's all that big a number, but this is not like the Sean Alexander, LaDainian Tomlinson early 2000s anymore. Every backfield is a backfield by committee, basically. So if anyone's getting around 70% of their snaps and touching the ball 20 times per game from the running back position, on a showdown slate, they should probably be priced above $9,000. And again, the reason Akers isn't is because this has kind of come out of nowhere. It really seemed in that game against Kansas City that Los Angeles wanted to see what they had in Kyron Williams. And I think a part of that is Kyron Williams, one of his biggest traits coming out of college, great in pass protection. One of the best pass blocking running backs currently in the NFL, even though he's a rookie. Like, that's how good he was in college at it. And I think they were kind of like, oh man, we have no tackles. We've got like no guards left. Maybe play Kyron Williams a bunch and see if Bryce Perkins can survive. At the same time, I think the Rams kind of look at Cam Akers right now and go, you know what? This is a lost season. Like, I think they look at him a lot like they're looking at this Baker Mayfield thing, where it's like, what are we going to do with these last 4 games? We might as well see what we have in some of these guys. And I think for Cam Akers, who was in the doghouse, there was some weird stuff going on between like with him and McVay, who even knows what was happening. I think this is almost like a, you know what? Let's give him 20 touches a game down the stretch and just see what he does with it. Like, extended audition. Kyron Williams, we've got a longer leash. We've got more of a clock with this guy. Like, we don't have to see what he has this season. We can see what he has next season. But Cam Akers, let's figure this out by the end of 2022. So I do think he's going to be heavily involved in this game. I think the Raiders have been pretty susceptible to giving up fantasy points to opposing running backs this season. Obviously, there's a situation where this game just gets so out of hand that if it does become a game that's defined by the Rams having to drop back and pass, I think that's where Kyron Williams gets a lot more snaps because, again, he's the better guy in pass protection. But yeah, I think Akers, again, is if you believe what we saw last week is going to carry over into this week, he's underpriced.
So wildly, as we're 2.5 hours, almost to the minute away from this game kicking off, we do not know officially who the quarterback will be for Los Angeles. And I know we've brought up Baker Mayfield a number of times, who's in his 3rd day with the organization since being claimed off waivers, expedited him the playbook so he could study it on the plane out west, obviously, after getting released by Carolina. If you're, it probably feels more like a just fade the QB situation in LA altogether. And that's certainly, I think, what most people are going to do if you've got one dart, one lineup. But if you are making 10 lineups, 20 lineups, and we find out, as I think we suspect, I don't want to put words in your mouth, this is what I expect, tell me if you disagree. If we find out that Wolford's going to be the starter for LA, despite the neck injury, you putting him in some lineups and then maybe Baker Mayfield in like one lineup out of 10 or 20, just in case, just for giggles. I mean, how do you handicap this?
It's so weird. I can't remember a quarterback situation like this recently. I do remember, I'm going to like pat myself on the back for a second. I do remember was it Patriots Bears Monday nighter, I think.
Yeah, where we didn't know if it was going to be Bailey Zappi,
right? But we had found out
going into the game it was going to be both.
Right, but it was at a certain point. It was, I think I wrote this the night before, but at a certain point, it was like Max trending towards playing. Max probably, if he's available, he's going to start.
Right,
and it was like, okay, cool. But I remember saying like, I'm not going to touch Mac Jones because, as crazy as I think this sounds, I think they want to use Zappi in this game too. Or if like anything goes wrong, they'll turn to Zappi. Like, generally speaking, there's no value in playing a backup quarterback on a showdown slate.
Yeah.
But avoiding a bad starting quarterback is something we can definitely look into. And the weird thing with Wolford and Mayfield is I almost think they're too similar, if that makes sense. Like, I think if Wolford's available to play, I think he just plays.
Mm-hmm.
Unless like we get to a point where he's re-aggravated his injury to the point where he can't play anymore. Like, I guess that is on the table. My thinking with like a weird collegiate style quarterback by committee situation was that if Wolford's ruled out and we get Baker Mayfield with the Rams playbook for 72 hours and Bryce Perkins, those guys are at least 2 different types of quarterbacks that you could maybe see those weird, like, okay, like Mayfield gets a drive, Mayfield gets a series, then Perkins comes in to throw off the defense with his legs and more designed running plays, kind of the way that like the Niners used Trey Lance in his rookie season with Jimmy Garoppolo. But if Wolford's there, I just think it's Wolford. And I think the most important part of this, and we were kind of joking before the show started, like, man, this is annoying. It makes this kind of hard, blah, blah, blah. But we both came to the conclusion, well, at least everyone sucks. Like at least every option is a bad option at the end of the day. It's not like there's a Hall of Fame quarterback here who you really want to use. Like, oh, I don't want to miss out on this guy. I know he's going to start. Like, they're all bad options. And not that the Raiders defense has been good, but they have been much better at getting pressure lately. They actually have 11 sacks in their last 3 games. That is more sacks than they had in their first 9 games of the season combined. So things are starting to get better, like Chandler Jones and Max Crosby, like 2 really good edge pass rushers. Like they should be able to get pressure. And also just this Rams offense in general has not been conducive to great quarterback performances so far this season. Like I'm someone who drafted Matthew Stafford in season long. I think anyone else who's kind of in that boat with me can understand the following statement, or like it will kind of dawn on you when I say this, but there has only been one time this season a Rams quarterback has started a game and finished it with more than 20 DraftKings points. And that was week 2. So generally speaking, fade Rams quarterback, regardless of who Rams quarterback happens to be, has been a pretty good strategy. So I think we can kind of just like carry that through into tonight.
I just think in general, like ignoring the quarterback situation for LA, I think in general, the vast majority of lineups, and who knows how the game will play out. I'm not saying it'll be the winning lineup for the $500,000, in the Thursday night contest for DraftKings, but I think the vast majority of lineups, save for the people that just intentionally get wild, are going to be heavily Raiders stacked. It would just be crazy not to be. I mean, you want to have the 2 studs in your lineup. They're going to be very, very highly owned, not 100% because nobody is, but very, very highly owned. And after that, you're just sort of picking and choosing and trying to get a little creative. But I think most of that creativity is going to come in the form of a Raiders blowout. Like even this is something you wrote about in your article too. Even the Raiders defense is not good, but they're going to have a decent amount of ownership tonight because they're a streaming option for season long leagues as teams are either in or approach playoffs this week, just because of the matchup on the other side, which is this dismal Rams offense that we're talking about.
Yeah, I think I'd be more than willing to use Raiders defense in a flex spot. I thought for a half a second about captaining them, and look, maybe that is like the big brain way to save money and get all your favorite Raiders offensive players into the same lineup, would be to captain Raiders defense. And like I said, the pressure's been much better lately. They've been forcing some turnovers because that pressure's been better. I think each of the last 2 starts, we saw Walford 2 interceptions in his crack at this offense. Bryce Perkins threw 2 picks in his crack. I think Baker Mayfield is probably the best quarterback of these 3 quarterbacks, but it just seems insane to me that he would be able to play in a football game 72 hours after first seeing a team's playbook. I mean, I just like if somehow he's plays tonight and is good, like, can we just cancel all of preseason football? Because apparently we don't need it.
Well, we were talking about this on the show earlier this week that, when McCaffrey went to the Niners, they still only had like a handful of plays for him. And a running back, like if ever there were an easy position to just work a guy in after just getting there and not needing to like know all the intricacies of the playbook, it is the running back position, the position that we constantly joke, you can pull a guy off the street and he's going to run for 100 yards. Quarterback, not the same. And it's you're talking about a former number 1, like a former first overall pick, but Baker's not that guy anymore. Or maybe he was never that guy to begin with, and that's just what his draft status was. But this is like, you wouldn't, I mean, it like if they acquired Tom Brady 3 days ago, you'd start him because he's Tom Brady, but you still would feel like, well, I don't know, is he the best fantasy play this week? Like,
that'd be
that conversation would still happen.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I think maybe if this was let's even say Baker was, who's a good, Ryan Fitzpatrick. Let's say it was 2 years ago and this situation was happening with Ryan Fitzpatrick. At the very least, I'd look at someone like Fitzpatrick and go, all right, this guy's played for like 8 different NFL teams. He's played for a bunch of different head coaches and offensive coordinators. There probably isn't anything that's like insanely different about this Rams playbook than another playbook he's seen in the past, maybe he'd have a chance to pick up on this relatively quickly. Baker Mayfield does not carry with him that sort of like wealth of experience and knowledge that Ryan Fitzpatrick or a Ryan Fitzpatrick type, even Geno Smith. Like, I think Geno Smith's a good example of this. Like, just a quarterback who's been around long enough where he's seen a bunch of stuff. I don't think Baker's like that. And while maybe you could make a correlation kind of between like the Stefanski offense he saw with Cleveland and the McVay system he's probably going to see, well, definitely we'll see a McVay system with Los Angeles. Like, maybe there's some correlation there, but yeah, I just look, what's eat my hat, eat my shoe. I don't even know what the saying is. Like, whatever. I'll eat my hat if Baker Mayfield plays really well, but like,
I'm just looking at his game.
This seems crazy
this year with Carolina. It's like, he had one good game in week 1, and that was it. The rest of the season, and he's been there all year to learn the playbook. He's been bad week after week after week. All right, in the interest of time, because there are a few more things I want to get to before we get out of here, and no, there are no Madden Sims because of Thursday Night Football, but we really haven't talked about the tight end position in this game at all. I am personally interested because this is a decision that I need to make for my season-long team in terms of which one of these guys to play tonight, one of my teams anyway. But also I just find it interesting in the wide world, the DFS, because they are very similarly priced, only a few $100 apart. Tyler Higbee and Foster Moreau, obviously. Neither one is a world beater, far from it. But the Raiders are 31st DVOA against the tight end position. So it's like, well, play Higbee, right? Well, the Rams are 32nd, dead last against the tight ends. So Foster Moreau. So what direction do we go with these two guys?
I feel pretty strongly Moreau's the better play. And it's just about the way they're used. I'll admit, when we found out that Allen Robinson was going to be done for the season and Cooper Kupp on top of that, my first thought was not, oh my God, Van Robinson coming out party. It was, oh, Tyler Higbee's going to see a ton of volume. However, in that game specifically against Kansas City, less so last week, but still to a pretty alarming degree.
Well, he got hurt last week too.
Yeah, but his route participation rate against Kansas City was basically non-existent. They just had him stand there and block because that's how badly they need help along their offensive line. It's basically that like George Kittle situation, except to the nth degree. He's just not running routes. Like, he's on the field, but he's not running routes. And if he's not doing that, he's not going to catch passes. Like, it's really just that simple. So combining that with the fact that the Raiders' offensive potential in this game, like their implied team total is much higher than the Rams' implied team total on this game. So higher scoring offense, the guy who runs more routes. I would take Moreau pretty strongly over Higbee tonight.
More of a red zone target too, which obviously is.
And they're just going to be in the red zone more,
Right. Let's talk NBA before we get out of here, because I want to at least pay off the fact that this is a multi-sport show on Thursdays. We don't have too much time. It's a very short slate, just 3 games. The one at 7:30, an hour and a half from now, and then you have 8:30 and 10, I think it is. I can pull up some numbers here on my end too, but I know you've obviously been digging into the slate. Do you have favorite plays tonight from what is not it's not the most enticing slate, but nevertheless, other than like the Jokic's of the world, who do you really like?
Yeah, I'm just going through here to see if we've got any major news. So Jimmy Butler warming up with the intent to play. That's the classic Heat lingo for he's playing. I don't know why they just won't say that, but Jimmy Butler's going to be back. No Kyle Lowry. So I would say like Tyler Hero is probably in a really nice spot, even though Jimmy is back. Like, I just think it's going to be a lot of like those two guys running the show. But I do think that San Antonio Houston game, for as ugly a game in real life as it actually is, it's going to be a massive fantasy game because you've got no Devin Vassell for the Spurs, along with a host of other guys who are injured. And then Kevin Porter Jr. is questionable. Like, he's really the linchpin to me for this entire slate, because if Kevin Porter Jr. does not play, Jalen Green is less than $7,000 on this slate. His usage rate is 38% when Kevin Porter Jr. is not on the court so far this season. So will it be the most efficient performance you've ever watched in the world? Probably not. But San Antonio, the worst defensive rating in basketball across the last 10 days. They are giving up more than 120 points per 100 possessions to opponents in that span of time. if Jalen Green is going to be going up against that defense with a 38% usage rate at, I think he's $6,900 tonight, I want all of that. That all sounds great to me. Like Tari Eason is a nice target in that game. There's a bunch of different ways you can go in that particular spot, but I would say, yeah, just between the comical mess of errors, you know what? I didn't mention the Clippers either. I think John Wall, and then I would even probably go to like Reggie Jackson as well. No Kawhi tonight. You've got a couple other injuries with the Clippers. They're always dealing with something. I just think the Clippers and the Rockets in particular, you can really attack that like 5 to 6K range on DraftKings and maybe hook those guys up with a Nikola Jokic, who is incredibly expensive on this slate. But that's maybe where you find the value to make the money work for Jokic.
Yeah, 11-3, far and away the most expensive play. Nobody else is even at 10. And even honestly, you'd go sub 9 because you probably don't want to play George or Lillard tonight. So you're looking at, Keldon Johnson, Kevin Porter, Jalen Green, Trey Jones going to be in a really good spot.
Yep, Jones is good.
Yeah, they're and then obviously there are some cheaper plays like just in terms of the value. Isaiah Roby is going to be probably pretty popular tonight. Charles Bassey as well. So some things to consider. We are going to wrap, but if I could take it back to football for a second, because it dawns on me, we spent so much time, and it's all relevant. It's all relevant. We spent so much time talking about that game and the players that are involved, and I guess kind of more with the DFS focus. I didn't even get your thoughts on sports betting, the DraftKings Sportsbook side of things with that game. The Raiders are favored by 6.5. The over/under is 42. Indicates again or at least one awful offense and perhaps a really sloppy game, kicking heavy, like I always like to say when we have games like this, Garion. Very quick thoughts on whether you think the Raiders are going to cover. And also, I'm just curious if you're hammering the Van Jefferson overs, given the lack of options that whomever the QB has is going to have.
Yeah, I think Jefferson's not bad to take some overs because, again, I think the Raiders win this game pretty handily. So I think the Rams are going to be playing from behind in this spot, and that would just create more volume for their passing attack. So I think those two things pair pretty well. But yeah, look, I've reminded myself all morning that this is a Raiders team that somehow managed to lose to Jeff Saturday's Colts in his first professional coaching experience. So even things that look like a layup for the Raiders aren't necessarily a layup, but I just have no faith in the Rams' ability to score the football. And without Aaron Donald on their defensive line, I have no faith in their ability to stop the Raiders, who do have an above average offense. So I'll take the Raiders. I think it gets pretty lopsided. I would say something like 30-14, 30-17 is kind of what I'm pegging this game for.
36.5 are the receiving yards for Van Jefferson. And that is I'm just double checking. Yeah, that is the highest total on the Rams side, which blows my mind.
Well, we just don't know who's throwing him the ball. I guess you have to hold that against him at a certain point.
If you were throwing him the ball, I would hit the over on that.
I don't know about that. I'm pretty scared of Max Crosby. That dude's terrifying.
Oh, that's fair. Devontae at 88.5. All right, well, let's wrap. But everyone enjoy your night. Best of luck setting your lineups, placing your bets. Hopefully everything comes to fruition for you, obviously. And let's watch the game, because at the end of the day, regardless of how you do or don't feel about the Thursday night product, it is still football that we have in front of us. And like Garion said, nobody's feeling bad for Bezos right now. So thanks to AC, thanks to Eamon, thanks to all of you for watching. And of course, Garion, I am Adam. The Sweat tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern, the Slate 5:15 to take you into the weekend. We'll see you.